The Path of Futility, a Broken Realm short story. "But my lord, are you sure?" Petrov asked, as he had 13 times since they had begun. At least, Mannfred thought it was 13, he'd stopped counting. Giving a sigh, the von Karstein resisted the urge to decapitate his servant in a moment of irritated spite. He supposed he could not blame Petrov. Even after several lifetimes' worth of audacious deeds, what he planned to perform tonight was perhaps on the wrong side of daring. "You worry too much," the Mortarch chuckled with false geniality. Glancing at his underling, through the gloom of Castle Stern's undercroft, Mannfred patted the small, rune-marked box in his hand. "I lived through, endured the death of a world. Some would say I precipitated it. I think I can handle a bit of etheric rough and tumble." A low, rasping growl from the back of the chamber saw Mannfred snap his head around with a snarl. "And stop grumbling, Ashigaroth. Cowardice doesn't become you." In response, the dread abyssal gave a crackling hiss, furnace-orange innards blazing brighter as it snapped at the errant spirits drifting through the crypt. Snorting, Mannfred looked back at the center of the chamber. 7 living thralls drawn from Karstinia's most downtrodden villages had already begun the ritual, marking the flagstone with sigils of corruption that were old when the realms were young. Already those runes were eating at the stonework, the rock bubbling into slurry. Even if tonight's ritual went flawlessly, this chamber would have to be sealed for decades. Still, Mannfred had lived his unlife on the principle that any advantage was worth seizing. The Mortarch took a moment to watch his minions pour tainted ichor on slabs of rancid meat into the cauldron, each motion accompanied by a sonorous dirge and the ringing of rusted iron bells. Then he glanced back at the box. "I acquired this at Rot Soul Mire, you know," Mannfred said, as he clicked open the lid and reached inside with a heavy nullstone gauntlet. Petrov shuffled back a step as the Mortarch produced a crooked knife. The thing's blade looked to be carved from the mildewed bone, its handle of rotten hard oak wound with lurid ivy. Corruption emanated from the thing, fizzling against Mannfred's fingers even through the nullstone. Only the pyrophane powers bound into vampires' own beings kept it in check. You never know when such a thing will come in handy. The Mortarch strode forth, watching his thralls as they chanted, counting the syllables. As the 77th note of the dirge left his thralls, the vampire struck. The tainted blade carved open each throat in quick succession. Only the last of the thralls had time for instinct to take over and raise his hands in defense before the Mortarch's weapon carved through them and his neck alike. Mannfred could feel Petrov's hungry gaze as the crimson blood jetted outwards, splatted down into the cauldron. But the vampire had passed up feasts in the past for his own greater benefit, and he would doubtless do so again. As the bodies collapsed, Mannfred stabbed downwards, driving the blade into the blood-soaked flesh within the receptacle. A column of light, moldering green, feverish yellow, throttling purple, and all at once erupted from the cauldron, accompanied by a wave of nauseating stench. Pulling his cape close to ward off the odor, Mannfred braced himself against an eruption of mystic force. Even over the insane sobbing that now filled the vault, he heard Petrov scream as the vampire was launched backwards and Ashigaroth bound to its feet with a clatter of bone. The Mortarch's commanding hiss saw the dread abyssal restrain itself, even as Mannfred stared into the hateful unlight. The illumination dissipated. In its wake, something rose from the cauldron. It appeared as a withered tree, unfolding its grasping barren branches, but Mannfred knew this was an illusion. One only had to look to the shadows forming on the wall behind it to see the truth. The image of some bloated, inhuman, horned entity. As the cacophony faded, Mannfred lowered his cape and straightened. In the center of the tree's trunk, a lone, milky eye stared out, quivering with barely repressed rage. "Bold von Karstein," the tree demon wheezed. Its branches twitched with each syllable, the eye watering with gruesome seepage. "Bold even for you to invite one of us into your own halls. Of all the places in these realms that I do not care about, Castle Stern's I care about the least," the vampire shrugged. My only regret is your kind stench. I have never been able to get used to it. The grandfather is displeased with you and your ilk, vampire. You have run rampant as of late. You seek to halt blessed entropy, to defy your place in his great cycle. I am afraid he's about to become a lot more displeased, Mannfred chuckled. The Mortarch's expression sharpened into a scowl, narrow eyes locked on the decay demon. Within this seal creature, you are mine to command, so show me. Show me the bleeding gate. Gurgling in distaste, the demon's pupil shimmered out of focus. Upon the milky orb left in its wake an image resolved. Mannfred leant in closer. His eyes trailed over the image of a portal surrounded by carven vines, geist-light bleeding from it over the surrounding wasteland. Yes, there it is, the Mortarch murmured. More. Show me the defenses. This time the demon seemed slightly more obliging. A swirl of pus-laden blood congealed over the image before draining away to reveal hordes of trudging cyclopean demons, bloated monstrosities bathing amidst vile swamps and tribes of mortals marked by unclean runes debasing themselves before seeping altars. You see, von Karstein, the demon crowd. You see the hopelessness of your task, the insurmountable truth of it. All Invidia will rise against you. Cultivator will rise against you, to say nothing of the accursed Everqueen and her spawn. Oh dear, what a pity. How will I get out of this one, said the vampire, still smirking. Before he could continue, the demon gave a rattling laugh, its pupil reforming. The entity's gaze darted sideways. Following it, Mannfred's grin froze. One of his thralls had collapsed slightly off-center, landing atop one of the binding runes of the circle and smudging it. A small detail, yes, but crucial. Neferata would be howling with laughter were she ever learning of this. Another chortle left the entity, branches creaking and twitching. You really should be more careful, von Karstein. Mannfred threw himself backwards and unsheathed the blade Geistvor, a fraction of a second before the cauldron exploded, showering him with iron fragments. What rose from within was now a hulk of suppurating flesh, its lower body split into two stump-like legs and its torso ripping open so the putrid organs within could spill free. Branches punched from its shoulder and cracked into the foetid air, while its limbs were as moldering trunks. In the center of the entity's chest, the eye opened once more, staring out with redoubled fury. Mouths lolled open across the demon's flesh before belching forth a stream of pestilential sorcery. Rasping a series of incantations, Mannfred thrust his hand forward and unleashed a counterspell. A storm of screaming spirits erupted to meet the ruinous energies, both spells bursting in a shower of force. Mannfred had only just enough time to raise his blade as the wrought demon stomped forwards with uncanny haste, driving a trunk limb towards him. One hand gripping Geistvor's hilt, one bracing itself against the flat of the blade, the vampire caught the blow. Any mortal would have been hurled from their feet, if not pulped outright. Instead, preternatural strength flooded into Mannfred's limbs, his might matched against that of the demon now looming over him. Looking up over the blade, Mannfred caught his foe's gaze. Despite himself, he grinned. A yell of fury heralded Petrov's return. He had worked his way around the demon's flank and now charged it with sword drawn. Mannfred's foe did not even avert its gaze. For all the power behind the vampire's blow, it accomplished little more than seeing his elegant blade stick fast in the demon's bark flesh. Before Petrov could pull free, a cluster of slick vines bursting from the infernal creature enveloped him. Mannfred could only tut as Petrov howled in agony and terror, struggling helplessly as he was absorbed into the demon's body. Devouring the vampire seemed to grant the demon a second wind. Its eye quivered with the expectancy of murder as it pressed against Geistvor, more vines questing out for Mannfred. An insane burble left the creature as Mannfred hissed and was forced to a knee. In response, the vampire lifted his gaze, still grinning, and spat a single word: Ashigaroth. The chamber suddenly echoed to the clatter of bone claws, and a howl fit to freeze souls split in the air. Waiting for his opponent to overbalance, Mannfred threw himself prone, ducking beneath the demon's oaken limb. Before it could crush him, the entity staggered back as Mortark's dread abyssal pounced into his chest. Laughter turned to bellows of anger, and then howls of denial as Ashigaroth pinned the demon down and began tearing into it. As sickening noises filled the vault, Mannfred grunted. The von Karstein painfully got back to his feet with Geistvor's aid, watching his mount expel its outrage for a few long moments. "You claimed the task awaiting me and Invidia is insurmountable," Mannfred said, snarling for Ashigaroth to cease. All that now remained of the demon was a crooked spur of bark, the eye still quivering at its core. Even that was fading, the entity's strength thoroughly beaten out of it. Yet as he lifted his blade and aimed it at the tip of the slime-weeping orb, Mannfred grinned. There was one last thing he wanted it to hear on this plane. The truth is, you're absolutely right. With a single smooth motion, the vampire drove Geistvor down right into the demon's core. Yet even over its howls, Mannfred was certain his final remarks had reached it. In fact, I intend to make sure of it. Alright, Wargamers, so that was today's story, the Path of Futility, and honestly, I love this one. It's a great companion story to Broken Realms, Techless, which we covered, it seems like forever ago, but man, these things have been coming out so fast. And in that story, we got the general sense within Act 2 that Mannfred has a larger plan at play when it comes to what he was doing with the gate. If you're not familiar with that and you haven't watched my series on Broken Realms Techless, I would encourage you to go ahead. But basically, Nagash sends all his Mortarks out to go corrupt realm gates and kind of link them to the Shyish Nadir. That way, the great vortex of death will spread to other realms and start consuming everything, capital E everything. And so Mannfred goes out, and he seems to have this ulterior plan, but we don't quite know what it is yet. And unfortunately, it wasn't really brought up during Broken Realms Be'lakor, so I'm still anxious, and that's why this story is still so relevant. It's like, he wanted to fail, but we don't really know why. You know what I mean? Like, he knew about the defenses that were there. There was a ton of Nurgle armies. There was actually 3 distinct Nurgle forces in that area where the Bleeding Gate is what it's called, where that was. He split his army up into 3 and sent them out to go engage them, and then ultimately, he left himself open for Alariel to come in and shut him down. But even in doing so, when Alariel was winning and crushing his forces and that kind of stuff, he just kind of gave a polite, theatrical bow and stepped back into the gate and left. So he's doing something, and that's what's so exciting about Mannfred, is that you never quite know what he's got going on in the background. What we do know is that he tends to fail at things, but in a very entertaining way. So I'm sure he has a very cool plan that's going to blow up in his face in some capacity, and I can't wait to read about it, hopefully in Broken Realms Kragnos. But to that end, I like this little snippet because, quite frankly, anytime where there's interactions between factions that aren't on a battlefield, because it's a war game, the battlefield is kind of like the only context that we as gamers can really engage with the lore from a standpoint. These kinds of stories are so great for adding even more to the story, because now you have a conversation between what is possibly a great unclean one. It's a Nurgle demon, we know that, but it's not really specified. Whatever they describe, it sounds awesome, like a giant rotted tree dude. That sounds so cool. Anyway, so we have a conversation between that and a Mortark of Nagash, and it's just like, these are 2 powerhouse characters that they just hate each other intrinsically, and I just love it. Demons are, these kind of like beings of pure energy, and they hate everything, right? The Nurgle guy just hates everything about Mannfred, at the same time as that demons do operate in certain bounds of rules, and that is that how you can bind them and trap them, and essentially Mannfred was hoping to enslave one, at least temporarily, to be able to stand there and give him information, which is such a cool idea I want to see more of, because that's such a great dubious line to cross, right? Of just, I'm going to tap into and summon my enemy for the purposes of my own gain. We don't hear about that a whole lot from people in Order, but there's no reason it couldn't happen. There's no reason it couldn't be a wizard from the forces of Order trying to gain information to win a battle, and then everything just falls apart and people find him practicing, chaos magic, all this kinds of stuff. It's the coolest freaking thing, and I want more of it. Now, I will say, there wasn't a ton of, like, meat to this story. Like, it was a cool little snippet of something happening in the background. There's no, they didn't explain what Mannfred was doing or whatever like that, so I'm going to kind of end it there, but I would love to hear your thoughts. What do you think Mannfred is planning? So, for my money, I thought that he was... During the time of Broken Realms Techless, I thought he just knew he was going to fail, and so he kind of made it a show. It didn't seem like there was specific, he didn't steal anything, he didn't take anything, he didn't cripple any army per se. He didn't really do a whole lot in Ghiran when he lost. He just kind of, ducked out and poetically and left. But this is making it seem like he has an ulterior plan, and some part of what happened at the Bleeding Gate is a part of it. My theory at the time was just he knew it was going to fail, and he knew Nagash is going to fail, so he's just going to wait until the, Great Necromancer goes down, and so he can make power plays to go up. But this seems much more like he, instead of being a passive, waiting for Nagash to fail, this seems much more like an active, we have a plan to make it happen, which is so much more interesting. So I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think about that? What do you think his plan is? Let me know in the comments down below, and I will catch you there. Happy wargaming.